So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the MU-NCORP PI's meeting on this gorgeous day in Chicago. So I'm Ray Osaragamo. I'm the PI of the Baptist Minority Underserved MU-NCORP, and I think everybody knows Dr. Hirschman. Done?
Yeah, so I am vice chair for the MU-NCORP and chair-elect for the SWOG group chair position. And I also represent a minority underserved MU-NCORP at Columbia University. So I'm one of you.
So welcome, everyone. Looking forward to a productive session today. As we have done before, we have deliberately avoided too much structure. So we're not going to be talking at you with didactic, slides or whatever. What we really desire is interactivity. And just the one housekeeping item is, please, if you want to speak, as we do want you to speak, please step up to the microphone, because we have colleagues online by Zoom, and they can't hear you if you just sit and shout. So please use the microphones.
And I'll just say that from the discussions that we've gotten in the past that have sort of evolved on their own, it's really been invaluable to us and to the leadership in SWOG to understand the issues at the sites, that we go back and strategize, whether it's strategizing with hope to get new ideas for funding, or strategizing, with the committee chairs and the other leadership to really understand the issues that everybody's facing, so we can be thoughtful and intentional in terms of how we make decisions going forward. So that being said, we really appreciate the fact that this group is really very open with us. I think we wanted to start out with sort of I don't know if it's the elephant in the room, but one of the things that's sort of surprised us the most over the past several weeks, which has been the change in the grant timeline. So assuming that everybody and before we get too far down, anybody online, if you have any questions, please type them in. We're monitoring the chat, and we will read whatever questions you have, and then also try to bring them up for discussion. So you should feel included in doing that. So as everybody knows at this point, or I assume that everybody knows, that the grants universally got delayed. We were anticipating that we would be writing the NCTN grants or have the RFAs about now. In the past, they came out right around the group meeting, so that we would be getting the RFAs around now for the lab sites, for the NCTN grant, and for the biostats grant, that we would be writing that grant until it was due, like sometime in February. We'd take a deep breath, and then we'd get the RFA for the MU-NCORP grant sometime in the spring, and then we'd be writing that all summer, and it would be due in August. So that was on our minds in terms of how we were going to be spending the next year. But I think, and it's only a guess, that due to a whole variety of different things, the decision was made to postpone those grant deadlines. And so the NCTN, which was already approved, the RFA has already been approved by the Board of Scientific Advisors. I think there's a lot of turnover at the NCI. There's a lot of uncertainty with regard to budgets. There's a lot of political unrest. And all of that may have contributed to some decisions to postpone it. So we had heard this in the rumor mill on our side. Was this going to get delayed? Yes or no? And, lo and behold, we got the email, I don't know, 2 weeks ago-ish, more or less, that the new timeline for the NCTN side of it was that we were going to get the RFA sometime between May and September. And that sometime after that, it would be due. And so then the decision on the MU-NCORP side was clearly to postpone submitting, I think, your RFA to the Board of Governors to get that approved until you had a better sense of the timeline, knowing that in the past, the timeline's been more or less around 6 months after the NCTN. So if everybody didn't hear the news, I'm here to share that with everybody and sort of open it up. We have our colleagues from the NCI here with us today to help answer any questions any of the sites may have about that. So just to start, does anybody have any questions?
I wonder if Kate, Bernard, you guys want to add anything to that while people are getting ready to ask their questions?
No,
Please use the
So
microphone.
so that the people on the phone can, I mean, on the Zoom can hear. Yeah.
well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think Dawn had explained everything thoroughly. So we are basically waiting for the Office of Grants along with leadership from NCI and especially leadership from Division of Cancer Prevention to sort of come together so that we can have a new timeline. But for you not to worry, because we have been approved for the extension in terms of with this grant.
Yeah, I think everybody gets a 1-year cost extension, which means that everybody's going to get their last year of funding for an additional year. So
Right.
Instead of being a 6-year grant, it's a 7-year grant,
Right.
more or less.
And so, now I have to admit, sometimes I'm not quite absolutely sure about that. Initially I heard that we were still waiting to hear about approval for this cost extension after the leadership and the Division of Extramural Activities or Affairs, DEA and OGA, Office of Grants, all of the leadership and in DCP, Division Cancer Prevention, sort of all come together and ultimately result in official approval. I believe that there has been official approval, but that's
I mean, I think the official approval for the NCTN side came, and so maybe this is slowly following that as well. But
Right.
one would anticipate if they're going to do one, that they would have to do the other. But
right. So there's a new timeline that has to be established, and so that's where we are now. When this will be presented before the BSA, that's yet to be fully determined as well.
I don't know, Kate, if you have is there any other information we left out of that? I mean, just to reassure everybody.
Thank you. So does this mean that accrual targets and cancer care delivery targets and cancer care delivery budgets will remain the same?
For that next year?
Yes. That's my question.
Presumably, that's the case. That's,
Yeah.
So is that what the NCI is saying?
Well, regrettably, we're all sort of working, sort of waiting to hear and to make final determinations of everything. So, so no, I can't. So we can't answer that question right now, but that's a great question.
Well, that's why I asked it. Not that it's a great question, but you wouldn't want to go a year and then suddenly realize your accrual target is doubled and your budget's the same.
I don't think I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, I think it's also going into a new grant year. So it's going into a new grant cycle. So the way I see it is that this is an opportunity for us to really, like on the SWOG side, but also on our sites, to use this time to strategically think, like, how can we get in that we now have extra time? Like, how can we be in the best position when we resubmit our grants? And I can tell you from a SWOG perspective, you know, and I'm happy to share other conversations around this, is that, you know, Lucky and Chuck and I met last night, and, you know, we're like, we're going to start, because the longer the lead time, you know, we have, the better we'll be in a position when it comes to submitting the grants.
I totally on board with all that, but from a small organization standpoint where budgets are tight, I guess I'm asking for affirmation from our NCI representatives that we're not going to suddenly see a higher lift with a stable budget.
From the cancer care delivery side, I can tell you that we have no intent to make the three studies open remains.
I wonder, I think it looked like Leslie was about to weigh in.
Yeah, so I'm sitting on an airplane that's been delayed, so I have a spotty connection. But we are not going to, you know, Jim knows from experience, we are not going to double your requirement and half your budget. We haven't worked that way in 30 years, and we don't intend to do it now. We're all in this together. We're doing what we think is the best to preserve the program and maximize the output of the program, given the unbelievably difficult budget periods that we're going into. And what we know now is what we're to put in that blast email to the MU-NCORP mailing list. We will be extending up to a year because we can't have grants for more than 7 years. We have no budget for this year yet, FY24. We don't know the budget picture for FY25, and you will know as soon as we know.
I mean, sometimes we see when there's, you know, the point of having these conversations is also to reassure people. This is not something that I think is a specific sign that nobody believes in the MU-NCORP system anymore. Nobody believes in the NCTN, and that the system's going to fold, and that we're not going to, nobody's going to be supportive. I think, you know, we should throw all of those thoughts out of our head.
Right. It's absolutely the opposite. It's thinking strategically about how we can best preserve the productivity of the entire system in a difficult budget environment, or fiscal environment, I'll say.
So I can certainly share that the last board meeting, the BSA meeting, the NCTN RFA was discussed and unanimously supported with glowing feedback across the board. The MU-NCORP was even mentioned, you know, as also a very positive development. So the idea that somehow these programs will disappear or crater or something, I don't think is justified by the prevailing sentiment.
Yeah. So we wanted to reassure everybody that that wasn't the intent with
absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, Ray, as you remembered, there was a substantial request for a budget increase, which the board approved, but we can't increase budgets if we don't have money. So the difference in the timing is that DCP has not brought the MU-NCORP renewal RFA or concept to the BSA yet. And that will be delayed for a little while as we consult, as Bernard said, as we consult with DEA and OGA.
Do we have a question online? Ken Matthias, a lot changed in 2013 to 2014. Should we anticipate another round of large changes are coming after the extension year? So kind of maybe Ken and Jim, you're sort of living in the same paranoid world or something.
Right, those
Yes.
were the whole
We
system
don't
changed.
anticipate major changes. We had an evaluation that was very positive. There will be adequate lead time. I mean, there certainly will be no major changes to the detriment of the program. And whatever, if there are any changes, there will be adequate lead time to address them.
Yeah, the NCTN RFA discussion, there was acknowledgement of how much the NCORP contributed to all the positive things that people were so excited about. So there's deep understanding that this is the right track we're on.
And I think, as somebody that was co-leading.
Including,
Go ahead.
including, I will say, we covered the NCTN in minority and underserved accrual. If it wasn't for the NCORP, it could have been an embarrassing presentation. But because of the contributions of the NCORP, now I'm talking about to treatment trials, the treatment studies look better than they would have.
I was just going to say that we didn't have a whole lot of track record in terms of CCD, for example. That was a relatively brand new program. So we were really operating in the dark, both in terms of writing up those components for our grants, and developing the scientific program. And I don't know if Kate, you want to speak to this, but I would consider it, from sitting on the steering committee, from being on the being co-chair of the committee here and hearing from the other groups, I would consider it to be extremely successful, and we've accomplished a lot. And a lot of really unusual and challenging trials. So I would say that the sites have a lot to be proud of in terms of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Dawn. I think the key thing to, again, reiterate is in 2014, when NCORP came to be, that's when Cancer Care Delivery came to be an NCORP. For those who were part of the previous NCCCP program, there was a quality of care component, but it was different. So in the 10 years that this has been going, we've got 24 studies activated. We've got another 5 studies soon to be on the ropes here. So we've got 30 studies that'll be underway. As Leslie said, we've had our program evaluation for Cancer Care Delivery in preparation for the renewal, and it was very well received. People were really, really happy. The reviewers thought we had done a lot in the time that we had, and of course they wanted to see it grow like this. And but we have to do what we can within the constraints of the funding that we will have. But just as Leslie said, we do not expect any major changes to take place for the Cancer Care Delivery components.
Thank you.
Questions, comments, observations, online, in person?
Yeah, Jeff Bamber, I just have a comment. I think, after hearing about the DEI, this, and I think the presentation was really excellent this morning. But I think at the end, I noticed one of her slides, she was talking about healthcare disparities. And the NCORP, really, one of the missions is healthcare disparities. I think SWOG has done a really poor job in identifying what they're doing in that area, whatever they are doing. And I think that the DEI initiative is kind of like bottoms up. It's really, really good. But I think we need to be also going top down in terms of not importance, but in terms of thinking about studies specifically to address certain disparities, whether it be older adults. We do have AYA, or certain populations where individuals have increased disability or poor outcome. So whatever you're doing, I don't hear anything, I don't see anything. And if I was reviewing the next grant coming from here, which I won't be doing, I would like to see that. I'm surprised that you haven't gotten more feedback maybe from the NCI in terms of that. So that's just, and that compares maybe to some other groups that, you know, maybe you're doing a better job. Maybe it's part of it's marketing, but part of it is study design as well. Thank you.
Yesterday, there was a DEI, there were several DEI meetings yesterday. One was a leadership meeting that all the meetings were open, actually. The first meeting, I guess, was a town hall, and it was, I mean, virtually standing room there. It was so busy, but ultimately the leadership meeting resulted in certain concerns, that one of which that you mentioned, which is how to work from the, well, of course, they were speaking mostly about working from the ground up, but I understand what you're saying, from the top down.
I think the ground up is good, but I think that I don't think that we're designing studies specifically, or if in what we are doing, maybe we're not marketing it the right way or presenting it the right way, but we could do more like an older adult studies or other types of studies. Anyway.
I mean, I think the question for these types of, you know, is always, do you lump or split? And do you have separate committees that address certain things like AYA or elderly? Or do you try to embed it and have these themes go across the disease and cancer prevention control committees so that they're integrated into the science of the disease teams, as well as the population science and cancer control teams? And, you know, I think what you're saying is that maybe, you know, we've focused a lot in our DEI efforts in terms of issues related to accrual and understanding barriers to accrual and making that a top priority. And in terms of diversifying the workforce on every level, not just leadership within SWOG, which is a huge issue, but also at all of the sites, and making sure that we're, you know, that we have appropriate training and insights and intentionality in terms of everything we do. But I think you're getting into, you know, and maybe now the next steps are to really think about it from health equity research, and making sure that our research questions, or that we, you know, that we emphasize, you know, across the board, whether it's AYA or elderly or rural, we do have it incorporated in, but we may not be spelling it out, you know? So like when we think about the genomic tumor board that we heard about, that's really aimed at minority underserved MU-NCORP sites and rural sites, right? But we don't label it that way. And so, but maybe part of it is being more thoughtful about making sure that we're answering health equity questions as well. Is that, did I say that, what you're paraphrasing correctly?
I think so. And obviously there are some populations that you really have to take special effort, particularly the elderly population, and because that's a very large group of people. And there, we saw on the slides today that we're not really accruing all that well in that area. And it's so maybe in certain cases you really do need to target. In other cases, you know, just be sure that, you know, you're addressing the issues. So thank you.
For sure.
Just want to mention that Patricia Robinson, who spoke today at the plenary session, she yesterday, she and Don Dizon and others were trying to establish some sort of platform upon which we can address issues like that, since as the slide that Patricia showed, that what we formally defined as diversity now extends to different groups, different ages, age groups and things of that nature. So I will share your concern with Patricia and with Don.
Thank you. I did speak to her after the meeting, to share the same view with her, and she said she was completely on board with what I was saying, that she agreed, or at least she was polite enough to say she agreed with me. Thank you.
But I think as important as it is to bring it up here, it's really important to bring it up during the committee meetings. When we all sit in those rooms and hear the presentations of the studies that are coming up, whether it's, is to say, like, have you thought about how this would be for an elderly patient? Have you thought about modifying a study like this just for the elderly or just for Hispanic population, whatever the issue is, and continue to bring those issues up during the meetings? Because I do think the committee chairs need to hear it, and they need to hear it from the sites. The goal of the NCORP was to also help people that were in it, that were practicing in all of these different environments, to identify issues to inform the science.
So this issue is also compounded by the fact that IRBs really need to focus on inclusion of as many different populations as possible. So if you are going to target one particular group of people, you have to have that justification from a regulatory perspective in order to support that. So that is one additional complication when it comes to protocol design, that it has to not look like it is unnecessarily excluding particular populations, but rather targeting those populations that, say, have a particular concern that has a higher incidence, for example. The other consideration along these same lines that someone had mentioned during one of our just networking sessions was, the consideration to close certain studies to accrual for certain cohorts. So, closing it to the white cohorts, but leaving, say, Hispanic or Black or other cohorts open, even though it might take a little longer, perhaps that could then balance some of those results.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of have got to the point where we're monitoring better. But I think one of the things, at least I've brought up or have been concerned about, is that we don't have a solution when we start to notice it. And I can give you our experience on iCheckIt, which is a prospective cohort study that is, to identify predictors of immune-related adverse events. And we first look at the data. First of all, it started to accrue faster than any of us anticipated. And then when we start to look at the data, the diversity is much more limited than we had wanted. Now, some of it's because of tumor types, because one of the big tumor types for that is melanoma, which there's not a lot of diversity, and we just recognize it. But while there was a plan to monitor, there was no action plan, right, for when we started to notice it. So do you close the study? Do you close it to certain groups? Do you try to increase your educational campaign? Well, that sounds good, but at a study that's accruing that rapidly, there's not, you don't have any time, right? So part of thinking about in terms of how we monitor and encourage, we have to also have plans and backup plans. And I think that that's what this taught us, because it's hard when you're actively accruing and then all of a sudden have like an arm closed or one population that you're not accruing to anymore to that point. But we need to figure out what that sweet spot is to figure out what the best approach is. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that, but it's certainly a challenge.
I think you've hit on a critical issue. And the thing is that depending on the type of study, you could be limited, or you might be able to do it. Like I was involved in the Z11 trial, and I reached out to the PI. She kept the study open for 4 additional years to accrue enough Asian individuals and also some Pacific Islanders so that they could answer that question. But then that was not a treatment trial. It was not a situation where the therapy might change during the situation. This was addressed during the NCI I think it was NCI ESCO Symposium on Older Adults. There was one of the chapters in the NCCN monograph that people can look at, and different strategies were suggested in that particular chapter about how to kind of approach different scenarios. It's something that maybe we could brainstorm more in the future, but there, I mean, not every trial is going to be the same. Thank you.
Dr. Gopalakrishnan, online, you raised your hand.
Hi, how are you? This is Regisha Gopalakrishnan from Columbia MCorp. I just had a quick question, and that is, it's been incredible to participate in some of these intergroup studies. I think the one observation I've had as I've essentially been involved with the committee meetings is sometimes when a trial is essentially proposed, I've actually, in Zoom, essentially sent a message to the PI or the person moderating the session and brought up some points such as looking at specific populations like the elderly or looking at pros. And sometimes while I've never really received feedback at that time. And when I've actually volunteered as a community oncologist at one of the MU-NCORP sites to be a part of essentially to help, formulate such questions, I've been told that the input was not necessarily, that the leadership for the trial had been essentially formalized and there was not many changes that could have been made. So I wanted to ask the question to the group, and that is, when trials are being proposed essentially in the individual subcommittees, I understand that the framework for most trials are going to be created, prior to them being presented to the larger committee. But is there an opportunity for some of the community oncologists who are part of these MCorps, who are at minority sites, to participate in some of the working groups? Because I think there's a perspective that we could offer that may not necessarily be seen at some of our at larger academic institutions, and that might actually help frame some questions also as well. And the reason I bring this up is I've actually done due diligence and actually reached out and spoken to leadership essentially more than anything else, but sometimes just not gotten anywhere in terms of trying to take more of an active participation in the committees also as well.
So that's a great question. And this came up, we had a strategic retreat just a couple of months ago in anticipation that we'd be writing the grant now. But this specific issue came up, and I'm so glad that you brought it up, because one of the opportunities when you start to think about writing a new grant is you can be self-reflective and you can say what's working, it's what's not, and do we want to change any of our structures? And one of the thoughts we had was formalizing a community oncology group and trying to figure out a way to have formally on all of the trials a community representative. And we've been pretty good about doing that on some of the cancer prevention control trials, but it doesn't seem to be uniform on the treatment trials, on the NCTN. And so one of the things that came up was, should we create a committee or a requirement or, some type of process that we need to think through, so that for each trial we have somebody that's going to be the liaison or the community site representative or the community site co-chair. I don't know, Ray, what your thoughts are.
So on the long committee, we have expressed for years now, set aside a slot for the community representative who not only is part of the plan, the early development of the concept, but helps us take the concept, especially gray areas of it, back to forums where community practitioners can actually give us structured feedback. That's what we've been trying to do for years. I'm surprised to hear that your experience suggests that you felt you were being excluded, because that's exactly the opposite of what we desire.
And I think a lot of the community sites see the protocol at the end and then have suggestions, and it is too late to change it, right? So at that point, you can't do it. So I think what you're saying is, how do we get like boots on the ground? How do we get involved from the beginning so that that kind of feedback can be
Yeah.
included?
Yeah, that should be part of the planning right from the get-go. Just as we now routinely seek feedback from patient advocates, you can't move a concept forward without a patient advocate giving you structured feedback and actually signing off on your proposal.
Right.
We really should, if we don't already, have a uniform process like that for
Right.
community
We
engagement.
don't, and we should. And I think if anybody has thoughts on it, about the best way to do that in a way that's democratic or inclusive, or, you know, maybe come up to the mic, because now's the time that we can start thinking about ideas to formalize this.
So Don, I think I might actually have an idea for you. I actually am the community chair for several of the Alliance trials also as well. And it's a lot more easier, I think, on the Alliance side to be essentially a community chair or within the subgroup also as well. But I apologize. I'm seeing patients in clinic and could not be there in person. I really wanted to be in Chicago for this meeting. But I'm happy to brainstorm with you offline also as well.
She's yeah, so that would be great. Just send, if anybody has ideas and they don't want to speak up, send me an email, because we do want to formalize this process. Other people have said that there's a formal process in the Alliance. We can take that and sort of use that as a model, but maybe there's a better way to do it. And so we want to hear about what's working with that model and maybe what we can modify with it.
I was also going to mention the Alliance because there's a community oncology committee. And so then when there's a new protocol, an email goes out and says, who wants to be the representative for the community oncology?
Does that cut across all of the Alliance, one committee across, or is it within individual? Because we have that approach in the lung committee, but it sounds like that's not uniform across SWOG.
I can't tell you, but I do know, because I am on the community oncology committee, that we get I got an email today. Does anyone, want to be the community and oncology representative for this protocol? And I believe it cuts across all the disease
across
sites.
everything. So I think what's happened is that some committees in SWOG do that better than others, but it's not uniform. And it's something that we can definitely fix and make more uniform. Just so I understand though, when they send it out, what if 20 people say I'll do it? How do they deal with that? You don't know, because you're just getting it.
Usually the first person that responds,
I see.
They choose, but there may be certain people that if the individual has more expertise, they might choose them, but they tend to send it out to different committees. Like if they're looking for a code, like the disparities committee, they'll send it out. There's the program officer or the program, like Monica's counterpart in the Alliance will send an email out, and they're looking for somebody for community oncology, or they're looking for somebody from disparities or whatever.
So like there's a group, and then people say maybe declare their expertise, and based on that.
No, they don't. Well, they're saying, are you interested? Is this, and these are usually concepts, but even so.
Concepts. I'm talking about the most meaningful input is at the concept phase. Because once it's out of the gate, there's not a whole lot of input, right? Like it's some of those decisions are done. Maybe you can have some during protocol development, but the biggest scientific impact is in the development of the concept.
So I think the best thing about that committee is it just creates the network and the pool for those other committees to reach out to find those community oncologists who have an interest in trying to contribute more. So now you have this list that you can reach out to, because there are so many other community oncologists. Instead of sending it to all of the ones that are rostered, you got this group that is a participating alliance. So maybe they're on the lymphoma or they're on the myeloma committee and they're on community oncology. And then they can say, hey, I'm interested, but I'm also sitting in this committee, so they can see that married together. It helps finding the context, making the connection easier.
And there's usually one per protocol.
They have to have one.
And then when you're on it, you review the concept and provide feedback? Do you fill out like a form? Like we always talk about these terms, and then I realize that most people out there don't even know, not even, because we're not good at explaining it, but when a concept is written, it goes, once it's been approved by everybody under the sun, then it goes to the SWOG executive committee to vote on it, right? And when it goes there, the investigators give a spiel, like a few slides. They're advocates on that. Advocates usually have to fill out a form. Like, I think the process that's been developed for the advocacy group has not been developed from the community group to the same extent. But then they have to say, like, how relevant is it? How easy would it be to accrue if I was a patient? And it sounds like we need to duplicate that from the community.
I think a point to make too is whomever that person is, it's no value in just a name only. They need to be actively involved in providing input, and they also need to consider it's not just how will this work within my own NCORP or my own community? How is this going to work across the broad network of NCORPs? Is a perspective I think DCP leadership would like to see more of a focus on as well, if you're going to have that specific focus person on a study.
Absolutely. Like, for example, Banu Symington is on as the community representative, or I don't even know what the title was, but because for the genomic tumor board, and she's at a rural site, and she provided a lot of input in terms of data collection, in terms of, how this would be viewed about feasibility, that to sort of show from the beginning, not just at her site, it's not really practical at her site, but how it would be based on her interactions with other people in the community, right? So broader than just your site.
So one of the things the Alliance Rural Subcommittee, which is part of that community oncology, has done is they created a checklist similar to what the DI had talked, that we're going to create a checklist for the protocol. What questions do we need to be asking? So they created a checklist for rural. And how many checklists do you want when you're trying to go through a concept to figure it out? Is there a way to marry some of those ideas together so that you're looking from a community perspective, you're looking from rural, DI, all of it, so that you're just asking these questions every single time with every concept off the bat. And that's also a guide for those community investigators to help make sure they're not missing something else, but they can be a champion at the same time.
And are the community investigators, are they site PIs, or can you be, a coordinator, or, like, does it matter like what your particular role is at the site?
From my understanding, to be listed as a community PI, you have to be an investigator, like an IVR. They might do NP-IVRs for DCP studies, I'm not sure. But the other person you could ask more about is Dr. Weiss for ECOG Akron, because they got something that he's trying to do similar there, but he knows that a whole lot better.
Okay.
I just opened my email, sorry. And I note there's an email that had come a few days ago from Alliance about a new concept, even before they have an advanced concept to identify a PI, looking to me to get input from our NCORP, and I sent it out to two people who have expertise, in our NCORP. So that's even an earlier way of getting involved.
Happens,
yeah,
but it happens fairly randomly. Like, there's no systematic way that it happens, and that's a fixable problem.
Yeah, eminently. So the Long Committee since Karen Kelly, I think, maybe even before, has had a community engagement committee. Paul Heskett chairs it. Probably worth talking to Paul, because every concept that advances closer towards, heading towards triage, actually, at least in the Long Committee, has to be reviewed by Paul's group. And they even have a nice external group, the MedNet, that allows us to poll a diverse range of clinicians for feedback and even some advertising of proposals. These are some pre-existing ideas.
We've worked with Nadine Hasori,
Yes.
who runs the MedNet. Usually it's like very superficial, kind of like, would you open the study? Is this an interesting question? Does it give, but I think, so that's like one venue. But you know, we did talk about it, but it certainly hasn't been operationalized. And, you know, I think we can, all of the lessons learned from the advocacy committees, you know, Barbara, I don't know if you have thoughts.
No, just thinking about what the person said, I know all these could go into the new grant, but we now said that we're going to have like 2 years. So maybe talking to the committee chairs to be aware, and maybe have people write in the chat and save the chat, or be sure to have an email there where people can communicate. And the other thing we were mentioning when I was talking to the staff of the MU-NCORPs the other days, we as patients, it is going to be the same in community. You're going to have one community is not going to represent. I'm a patient advocate, and I don't know what happens everywhere, right? So we have to, we offer like to have these town halls, if you may, for somebody to bring a concept and be the patient and have more than one patient advocate look at it. And maybe we can start integrating community to that you know, new project that we want to do. And other things about ideas, we as patients come up with ideas, but maybe sites that are seeing patients all the time and talking about not researchers addressing the elderly that have a big group or these other issues, we have to have that information to help guide the science as well. So that will be.
I mean, maybe mention some of the ideas we talked about in terms of advocacy too, about, you know, we were like, we could have something where people set up, you know, there's like an email for if you need advocacy feedback, and then you set up a Zoom and you can get like 5 or 6 advocates on the call so that you can like get a group of people with different experiences and, you know, from different backgrounds to contribute, as opposed to having one advocate for one committee, sort of to get a broader sense of feedback that sometimes the community sites are very different, right? Might have a very different kind of input from a minority underserved MU-NCORP site that's inner city versus one that's in like the Northeast, then one that's, you know, in Tennessee versus, you know, a site that's rural or in Maine. And so like similarly, maybe it's not one, you know, maybe it is one voice, but maybe it's also like a broader voice. I don't know.
Yeah, so we heard yesterday at the DART presentation, right, where 62% of their patients enrolled into rare tumor clinical trials were from community sites, which I would have thought would be the opposite. You know, the idea that community sites are willing to spend scarce resources to open a clinical trial that most of them will never be able to accrue a patient into. I mean, it just boggles my mind. So clearly, they figured something out that worked. And when I stood up to ask the question, I was trying to challenge them to think a little bit and explain to us what they did. I think the answer was they made the process simple. And what does simple look like is something that clinical trial designers need help understanding. And that's where that feedback will be very useful. The other side of it, though, is we don't want to start a process just to be able to check a box, right? So the question is, how will we know when we have proper community input engagement in the design of a clinical trial, the conception and design and execution, reporting and disseminating of a clinical trial, I think is an opportunity.
Yeah, I don't know, like what, from your prior experiences being involved in any kind of protocol development, if anybody's willing to say like what components worked and what didn't, you know, in terms of where you felt like your comments were, do you feel, you know, more listened to or not listened to, like where, has anybody had any experiences that were not positive?
So I can comment on a positive experience. I actually served as a community site chair, essentially, for a supportive care concept that we're actually presenting at the NCI, not through SWOG, but through another intergroup mainly through the Alliance also as well. I think the one thing that was really helpful for me was that I think when I was on these committees also as well, is the investigators, some of them were close friends at UNC and Duke, really took the feedback that I had at the ground level and potential pitfalls that they may run into in terms of essentially having the protocol, be open at multiple community sites across the country. And it was really great, even at the NCI level, when we were presenting the protocol, to chime in and to have a voice in terms of what could be anticipated potential barriers for recruitment. So I think it's been a really helpful experience. I just would love to do that here at SWOG also as well. And thank you so much for all the ideas. I'm learning a lot today.
I had one experience. I'm not one of the community researchers at all, not at all, but I work closely with the Moonshot, Biobank Moonshot within NCI. And so we have, of course, MU-NCORP sites that are seminal in terms of providing tissues for the Moonshot Biobank. But I remembered a situation where there was a very busy MU-NCORP site. They pretty much heavily relied on input from the CRA. And ultimately, it was an experience that I had where the CRA was highly influential in determining whether this protocol was acceptable for the site. And ultimately, the PI pretty much, went along with whatever the decision that the CRA made about the protocol. So that was just it was an experience for me, and it really showed me the importance of having input from the from a clinical research associate.
Yeah, they're boots on the ground. And so, also trying to, I can tell you at our site, Eric is here with me, they come up with so many of our strategies for recruitment and what's feasible and everything, that involves from beginning to end. It's such an important part of the team. So also figuring out how to formalize everybody's input that can be so key.
So I was just going to say, so I'm from, this is Marie Suga, I'm the PI of the Kaiser Permanente MU-NCORP. And, right now, I think the major place where we could actually put input is often at the steering board level, because every MU-NCORP has a couple of site representatives obviously on there, but every MU-NCORP only has like a very limited number of slots that they can actually put forward names for to be on these steering committees. And so they can be very, very competitive. And I will tell you, every single year when those names come out, I have 4 or 5 people that really want to participate and be part of that process. But, we only can get, maybe 1 or so of the 5 that we're submitting to be on a steering committee. And so I can tell you that experience just basically means that there are people that really do want to provide this community, input, and we're not actually tapping into that. So I just wanted to add that.
That's really great. I see at the NCI writing, notes to, our colleagues from the NCI writing notes, about that. I think about that a lot as we think about DEI and how do some people get selected for things and others not. And it is true, like I see in SWOG, we see it in our lives every single day, right? Like that, oh, you get some email, somebody wants a name for something, to submit a name to be on X, Y, a discussant here, on a committee there, who you're gonna nominate. And it's always the person that it's never a thoughtful, process that where you can maximize inclusion. It's often sometimes who's the first name that pops into my head? And, can we collect people's interests in a better way? Often the steering committees, you submit your own names, so how it's selected or voted on is out of our control. But there are some things that we do within SWOG in terms of nominating people that maybe we could be more democratic or thoughtful or open about to make sure that everybody that wants to participate at least has an opportunity.
So I just wanted to throw out there, since CRAs were brought up, we do have the CRA ORP liaisons for each disease site and committee within SWOG. I am the liaison for 2 committees. I'm less than a year into it, but I can tell you I have had to shoehorn myself into a lot of conversations already. So utilizing that committee, kind of similar to the oncology investigator committee, inputting that a lot more would be useful.
So just, and I don't mean to sound completely ignorant, so I apologize because I am, like, can you, like, how, like, it, for the ORP committee, because I guess I was thinking of it as nurse researchers, and is it mostly CRAs that is, like, what's the composition?
So a lot of sites are now using CRAs because nurses are too valuable.
Right.
Which, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in nursing shortage nationwide. CRAs are bachelors in my facility. It's heavily encouraged to have a master's. So we have lots of experience and we basically run the show. Kind of what you mentioned before.
Right.
And the ORP liaison group here at SWOG is anybody that's not an MD, pretty much.
Okay, so it's just, it's a broad swath.
Broad spectrum.
CRA for each site or group within SWOG that they try to set up. They're finding additional leadership.
Right. I mean, how, I guess.
I'd be happy to weigh in on our ORP committee. We're trying to rebuild it. And there's been a lot of transition because of the staffing turnover, but I would love to have a conversation, I think, with the leadership of the liaison committee about what people need. How can we be the most helpful? A lot of our representatives say, I've been on the committee for a year and no one's asked me anything. No one even knows I'm here. How do I get attention? How do I raise my voice? What can I do? So it's a partnership. I think there's a really good opportunity as we rebuild from the ground up our liaison group. And there are, as was alluded to, research nurses, CRAs, and or whatever category we refer to people in that role these days, but they're all oncology research professionals, and the range goes from folks that are just brand new in the role to senior research scientists who are nurses. All of those are subcommittees with under that umbrella. So there's a wide range of expertise that we can call upon. In addition, we have what we call our ORP lead distribution list, which is representative of each site in SWOG. So that's another way to reach out and say, hey, we need some feedback. So if there's a site that's especially versed in, you know, a certain type of disease site management or a certain successful protocol operation, there's a chance for them to weigh in. That's another opportunity that we've been organizing. And then in addition, beyond just our SWOG partners, we have a group that started from the ground up about 2 years ago that we call Research Operations Initiative, which is a group of people that really care and just want to have a voice and are very, very happy and willing to help. We met with NCI and CTAC and gave feedback, and 10 key initiatives have been identified. And if you haven't heard about that work, we'd love to share it with you. Several of the things that we brought up have been implemented, like the creation of EHR templates from CTSU. That came directly from the site saying, this is a way to save millions of manpower dollars and hours. So Dr. Doroshow implemented that. Andrea worked on getting the contract through CTSU, and now it's a standing requirement for every trial that goes through. So there's all kinds of things that we're willing to do, ready to do. I think it's gluing the dots together.
Yeah.
So we'd be happy to have a good conversation about that.
Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of the pieces, but maybe the communication isn't as good, and maybe there's some other structural changes we can make. So both, you know, formalized structure, but also enhanced communication, because turnover on PIs is high. And so then people don't know all these resources that are out there. So maybe there are things we can do on both of those ends.
We'd love to have a conversation. So
Yep.
let's make that happen.
Structure, process,
Right.
outcomes. So
Right. Everybody's used
wonderful.
down the NCORP like my maps and how to get from A to B.
Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think we don't have any more people online wanting to share. Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to weigh in who wanted to online, the Zoom folks? Hearing none, I think we can adjourn this
Yep.
meeting.
If
Thank you.
anybody has any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, don't hesitate to email me. You know, we will, you know, compile all this and try to think of some solutions for these structural changes, both now so that we can say that we put it in place by the time we have to put our grants in.
Thank you, guys. Another very inspiring meeting. It was good. Good feedback.